If you look at traditional creatine brands, probably less than 5% of their customers are female. Just making content that's oriented for that audience because they've been so neglected on this specific product means they're more interested in it.
Hi, my name is Dan McCormick, and I am the founder of Create.
So I think Meta, Google, TikTok, those platforms are only going to get larger and more powerful. And I think their core businesses are only going to get stronger.
Dan, welcome to the show, man. Appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
I'm glad that we're able to do this in New York. Is this this second live podcast appearance for you in person?
I think second or third, but all of them have been in this studio that we're filming in right now. So this is kind of like my home base.
So you got home court advantage here.
I don't know if you guys are ready for this.
Well, dude, we're so pumped to have you on. I mean, number one, we're a huge fan of your product. The first time we tried it was at that HPLT event in Austin that we helped Brian Mazza coordinate. So you guys were a sponsor. So there were bags of Create everywhere. And I remember just holding the bag and being like, this is such an interesting concept of like creatine is like the most studied supplement ever, yet 99% of people don't take it. I never took it because I was always like, well, I'm eating a lot of red meat. And then I went to do the research, and apparently in 2 pounds of like a fatty cut of meat, there's only 5 grams of creatine and maybe even less too.
Right.
So it's like, even if you're on the extreme end of meat eating, you're probably still deficient in something that your body needs. So this is just such a plug and play solution to our lifestyle. And it's amazing just to see the brand grow, the way you publish your numbers. It's just so cool to see everything that you're doing. So I think there's some good stuff we could dig into today.
Yeah, thanks, man. And I think probably less people are eating less red meat than you are, so they're likely not getting
Yeah.
the 5 grams. And the actual creatine that your body's able to consume from even 2 pounds of red meat depends how much you cook it, how much heat you apply to it. You might not actually be getting the full 5 grams because it denigrates during the cooking process. But anyway, excited to be here and chat with you guys.
What got you excited about starting the product? Because you started it when 2021 or 2022?
2022. So today's actually like the year
That's
anniversary of launching the business publicly. I've been working on it for maybe 6 months prior to launching, but like publicly, hey, products available for sale. This is what I'm working on about a year ago now. I'd been taking creatine for a decade prior to starting Create. I wasn't a college athlete. I never had like a major bodybuilding phase, but I got into it like many people for the first time in high school. I was a cross country runner, track runner, probably not too many of those guys taking creatine, at least back in like 2013, 2012 when I started. But I always had a really positive experience with it, never really experienced all the negative side effects that you'd hear about with creatine. I honestly just was like, whoa, I'm stronger and bigger and
I'm jacked.
I'm recovered. Yeah, I'm like, and like 17 at the time. I'm like, what is this stuff? And so I kept with it for the next decade or so. But when I would talk to people about creatine, like my friends kind of understood it, but let's say my mom or my aunt who's a doctor, anyone like that, they'd be like, what, Dan, why are you taking creatine? This is terrible for you. And that was not my own experience, but also when you do like 5 minutes of research on creatine, that's not what the science says. It's not what the research says. It's not what the people that take their health and wellness the most seriously say. And so there was always that kind of gap between my own experience and kind of what the public thought of it that I thought presented a interesting opportunity from like a business perspective, honestly. And then when I was looking to start something coming out of the last company that I worked at, it just checked a lot of the boxes of like, hey, if I'm going to start a business, I want it to be something I care about. And this is a supplement I've been taking for, as I said, 10 years. I want a supplement that can have a positive impact on people. And I truly believe that if more people are taking creatine, the world would be a better off place. And from like a e-com fundamentals perspective, and you guys know this being in supplements, like supplements check a lot of the boxes that you want for a kind of perfect CPG e-com D2C business. It's structurally high margin. It's a really high consumable or repeat rate consumable product. You can build a strong e-com business, but like hopefully one day Create and Noble will be on shelves, omni-channel, sold everywhere. And there's people that like really care. You have like a core base of customers that really care about the types of things that they're putting in their body. And you have this kind of major tailwind of like, yeah, that percentage, maybe it's 5-10% of the population today really cares about the stuff they're putting in the body. That's only growing, every year at a pretty rapid pace. And I think in 5 to 10 years, everyone's going to be super interested about creatine and the amount of meat they're consuming and the nutrients they're putting in their body. So that's how I kind of came to it.
That's awesome. It's crazy how early we still are on these trends. And it's funny to hear the story about your mom, because I remember, I think I was a senior in high school. This was like 2013. And I bought the creatine in pill form from GNC or something like that. And she literally thought I was taking anabolic steroids and freaked out about it. but I loved it. I had a great experience. But again, I just stopped taking it for whatever reason and then just restarted in 2023.
Yeah, that's like what most people think, or at least thought that creatine was. They basically thought of it as a proxy for anabolic steroids, and that's partially because creatine was popularized around the same time that steroids in baseball became part of the national conversation. And all of the guys that were taking steroids in baseball were also taking creatine
Yeah.
because creatine works and it's a part of a kind of a natural stack for professional athletes, but it got conflated with steroids as part of that conversation. And in the late 90s, early 2000s, tons of product came to the market, flooded the US market, creatine, and it was often mixed in with less pure ingredients, less pure mixes. So, for example, like NO Explode, I'm sure you guys have
Mhm.
tried it or someone that's tried it
Yeah.
before. Like, there's creatine in that. And so people think that like people thought creatine equals NO Explode. And so they take it for the first time, they crawled or they'd scratch their skin off, they'd have
Yeah.
some like crazy experience in the gym, and then in their mind they're like, oh, that's what creatine is. But like obviously that's not what you feel when you take natural pure creatine
Mhm.
by itself.
It's so wild that all moms basically think you're Pablo Escobar if if
Yeah,
you're on
yeah.
creatine.
It doesn't help that creatine looks like cocaine either.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's not helping creatine. Well, you've changed that.
Right.
So one of the things we were talking about before you got here was you've kind of done, not to oversimplify what you're doing, but you've changed the deliverability of creatine, which is awesome. It's in a gummy form in Create.
Yep.
And then you also are open sourcing a lot of your content, which I think is such a really cool strategy around just raising awareness, because you don't have to be a creatine user to benefit from the content that you're putting out there. So I'd love to press into both those, but curious about how you came up with the idea of the gummy. Just
Yeah.
like deliverability is so easy.
Yeah, so I think there's like the deliverability aspect and then like the branding aspect. From a deliverability perspective, what you hear when you talk to people that take powder or traditionally have taken powder, they have a huge tub of creatine in their cabinet that it's been there for 2 years, and they know it's there and it's super cheap and it was affordable, and like it's only 5 cents a gram, right? The issue with that powder is that most people are not actually consistently taking a shake on a daily basis.
Mhm.
If they are, they're forgetting to put creatine in it. Maybe they're traveling, they're certainly not putting creatine in a plastic baggie and taking it with them. And creatine, you need to be taking, call it 5 times a week, hopefully every day, in order to see the full benefits of it. And just the reality is, most people aren't taking that powder on a daily basis, or they're not seeing the full results and perhaps not even seeing any of the results because their muscles are never being fully saturated. The gummy, aside from uh, the branding aspect, which I'll get into, is a product that people look forward to taking, and because they look forward to taking it, that leads to higher adherence, and higher adherence leads to better results. And so that's one aspect of it. It's people look forward to taking it, and that leads to better results. The second aspect of it is that it's just kind of fundamentally juxtaposed to powder. Like
Right.
powder's intimidating.
Mhm.
It, as we said, it kind of looks like other substances. You don't really know what's in it. It could be anything, right? And for a lot of people, especially the types of customers we're going after, they just don't want to. It's scary to them.
Mm.
The gummy is the opposite of that. It's approachable. It's fun. It's delicious. It's convenient. So not only from a adherence perspective, but also from a just how do we differentiate against the other things on the market. It's helpful in that sense as well.
Yeah, it's interesting how something as simple as a powder versus a gummy, how that can be such a barrier to entry to people, especially like a lot of people when they're making drinks, they're throwing one thing in there, they maybe forget or don't even think to put creatine in there. But in gummy form, it's like it's very easy to just make that a part of your routine, where it's like literally 2 seconds, you have your exact creatine dosage for the day.
And what I always say to people, if you're making a shake 7 days a week and like you're super strict and religious about it, like just take creatine powder. There's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with creatine
Yeah,
powder, right? It's just that the vast majority of people either that's not part of their daily routine or they're not consistent with it enough. But yeah.
Was there anything in your research that made you more bullish on creatine monohydrate versus some of the other types of creatine that exist in the marketplace?
Just the fact that all of the research essentially on creatine, as you mentioned, I think in the start, creatine's the most studied fitness supplement on the market. And the vast majority of that research is on creatine monohydrate versus other variants of creatine. The other big one being like creatine HCl, creatine hydrochloride. It's not that there's necessarily anything wrong with those types of creatine. I think the claims around like 38 times more absorbent and all these other claims that they're making, probably not true. I think it's probably pretty much on par with creatine monohydrate, except for the fact that none of the research has been done around it.
Mm.
And so just stick with what people know, what they're used to, what essentially this whole ecosystem of creatine is built around. So yeah, nothing against the other variants other than likely the claims they're making are not totally true. And the research has not been completed on it yet.
Is there improved efficacy by having sugar in Create? Because one of the things that I've heard, just some like very strict dieters are like, oh, like it has sugar in it.
Yeah.
I'm like, I think it actually improves the efficacy of creatine absorption and uptake.
Yeah, there is research around higher absorption of creatine when it's matched with a carbohydrate. In this case, it would be the gummy or the sugar in the gummy. Um, that's not necessarily one of the reasons why we have sugar in the gummy. We want the product to be something that people look forward to taking. It's almost like a daily treat. It's creatine
Right.
that tastes like candy. And other than those highly strict dieters that you were mentioning, most people can their bodies can take 2 to 3 grams of sugar a
For
day.
sure.
But yes, that is one of there's research indicating that when matched with the carbohydrate, the uptake's a little bit better.
Yeah. When you launch Create, did you know that you wanted to do a flavor because it kind of builds a moat around your business if you can make something taste really good, or were you maybe tinkering with an unflavored version in the beginning?
No, I think the flavor is again going back to like how can we make a product that people like and like
Yeah.
look forward to taking, and I think flavoring is a big aspect of it. I think the orange was like a kind of a baseline flavor where it hits a lot of people. Like a lot of people like orange, whereas the blue raspberry I think is a little bit more differentiated. Like some people love blue raspberry, and other
Mm.
people are like I'm not going to take a blue raspberry candy every day, essentially. But yeah, I think again it just goes back to like how can we create a product that people enjoy taking.
Yeah.
So this is your first foray into the CPG space and your first startup, correct?
Yeah, so the first company that I started and also the first one in CPG had been in kind of the startup world, specifically within D2C e-commerce for the last 8 or so years. But this is the first time starting something.
What experience were you bringing from those previous jobs? Was it kind of like Shopify e-com marketing, or where was your expertise?
Finance and operations.
Okay.
So worked at a company away, which was like the rolly suitcase that if you
Yeah.
walk through an airport today, you see those company or
Okay.
those
I've
bags.
had one for 3 years. I
Yeah.
love it. Best suitcase I've ever owned.
Great product,
Yeah.
really great company. This was back in like 2017, where companies like that could raise a lot of money, attract a lot of talent. So I worked with a bunch of really smart people early on in e-commerce by being at Away, and then worked at a company called Parade, which was kind of women's underwear and women's basics. Think of it as like a Skims competitor,
Mm.
also in finance there. So had never started something, had certainly never been on like the more outward facing brand side of one of these companies. So that's all new for the first time running Create.
Yeah. And there's also your brother's Packy's newsletter,
Yeah.
Not Boring, which is an incredible newsletter. And you were, the way I understand it, his de facto editor, and you also run a newsletter for him as well, right?
Yeah. So Not Boring is like a newsletter on business, tech, and strategy. He's kind of known for these 10,000, 15,000 word deep dives on a specific company or topic, usually within tech or business. And he'd been working on it for 2 years. I had had these other jobs. He'd publish on Mondays. He'd send me these like 10,000, 15,000 word essays on a Sunday night being like, hey man, do you have, 4 hours to edit this? And for 2 years I did just out of, kind of brotherly love. And then when I was in between my last company and starting Create and still work with him today, I joined him on kind of a formal full-time basis to help him build out the business side of it, as well as write a Friday newsletter called The Weekly Dose of Optimism, where we celebrate all of the great things that are happening in the world today, but don't necessarily make kind of the headlines. It's one of the problems with the news, all the doom and gloom. But when you, on a kind of a longer time scale, you take a step back and basically the world has never been in a better place than it is today.
Yeah.
And on a more micro scale, the pace of innovation happening across biotech, energy, all of these kind of frontier tech, it seems like we're hitting an intersection or an inflection point right now. And so that newsletter covers all that, which is a really fun thing for me to do because even though I care about that stuff a lot, like the doom and gloom is what they hit you with on a daily basis. So dedicating 2 to 3 hours a week to searching out what are 5 things that are positively happening in the world today.
Mhm.
is a good exercise for me. And
Yeah,
we have like 200,000 readers that check in on that on a daily basis
that's
or weekly basis.
that's incredible. What would you say are some of the most impactful things that you learned about just writing at a really high level, working with Packy and doing Not Boring?
Yeah, he matches, taking his job very seriously with a certain level of humor and not taking himself too seriously. So he takes the work seriously, but he doesn't take himself too seriously. And I think that style is something that I've adopted as well. Hopefully, I don't come across as too self-impressed and
Yeah.
serious here. Um, but I think that combo is what makes his work special and what I try to adopt in other aspects of what I do.
Mm.
How cool has it been to see his success and also be able to share in it in some ways, being the de facto
Yeah,
editor?
yeah. I mean, he actually wrote about this today that 2023 was this like really hard year for him because he came on the scene in 2020 out of nowhere and within like 18 months basically thought he'd hit the pinnacle of like where he wanted to go in his career. He had raised two venture funds off of writing a newsletter. He had
Mm.
become an advisor at A16Z. He was talking with like the Collisons would call him to talk about like strategy stuff out of nowhere, Collisons from Stripe, and like he kind of hit this certain level in business. And then 2023 hit, and like the momentum just kind of paused.
Mm.
And he was still at like a place in his career that he couldn't have imagined 2 to 3 years prior, but it was no longer just like up into the right only. And
Mm.
2023 was more of like an oscillating, cool things will happen and then quiet and all this stuff. And he wrote about that today. And I think that's part of it. I mean, one, it was really cool to watch that upward, but it's been even more impressive to watch him navigate kind of the last year or so where like things aren't all up and to the right,
Mm.
and watching him like keep an even keel and not get too down on himself and all of that. But yeah.
What what have you learned specifically, I guess, from just being more of on the like creative side of things, as opposed before you were kind of on the finance operation side of things, like actually being able to tell a story is so huge in brand development and actually creating a brand. I imagine like some of that writing really helps you kind of refine that craft even for yourself with create.
Yeah, I think I don't have particularly great creative taste, I would say. I think like um, where I feel most comfortable is in writing, whether it's business writing, whether it's like I'm much more comfortable writing a 10 tweet storm on Create than I am putting up like one Instagram post about
Mhm.
it. It's just how I communicate. It's the best way that I can communicate. Um, but I try to translate some of that clear thinking, like let's get down to what's actually most important here, like what's the topic sentence of, or what's the thesis of this, and how can we translate that into a partnership with an influencer, marketing copy on a landing page, all the different ways that like it's important to get the main idea across. I think that is something I can pull from writing. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think also just being like chronically online because
Yeah.
we're writing a newsletter and promoting it on
Mm.
Twitter and all these things, like that skill set translates well to also promoting and evangelizing and doing
Mm.
education on this product as well.
Yeah, I really appreciate your brother Packy's honest perspective of 2023. And I think it's very relatable to a lot of creators. Like when you're just starting this newsletter from scratch, you have zero expectation of what it's going to turn into. But just creating this fresh content every day and just getting eyeballs on it and getting positive feedback, it's like the best dopamine hit you could possibly get. Like that in itself is such a reward. And then you reach these heights that he could have never predicted, whether it's like, you know, dealing with the Stripe brothers, raising two venture rounds, which are such amazing blessings. And they also bring their whole host of challenges too. So we've had like much minor versions of that, whether it's like with Noble, with the marketing agency, trying to monetize the media side. And we always go back to like, if we ever feel those feelings, like we have to just get back into the heart of soul, in the soul of how the brand was created, which is really sitting in front of the computer and writing great content about topics you're really passionate about and love too. So I don't know if that's what he was experiencing, but that's definitely something that we've experienced too and think a lot about.
Yeah, I think kind of every creator goes through some form of this at some point where they get the initial hit of dopamine that like, wow, the internet is so big, and by putting myself out on the internet, I'm going to get amazing things back, and that's an amazing treadmill to get on. And at some point, I mean, I guess for some people it's up and right only, but for the
Yeah.
vast majority of creators, like it starts to or you'll go through periods of time where it kind of flattens a little bit. It's like, wait, what happened to this special place that I thought was the internet? Like, is it really not as big as I thought
Mm.
it was? Is the market for my ideas not as large as I thought it was? I think everyone kind of goes through it, whether it's
Definitely.
an online creator running one of these brands or whatever it may be. Like, it's kind of how you deal with those. It's not even the downtimes, but it's there's like when the work is a little bit less exciting, a little bit less exhilarating. Can you show up on a kind of consistent basis and do the necessary work to continue to fight for that day when like the momentum will pick back up again?
Yeah. Yeah. There's almost like this overwhelmingness of choice that creators have because you're like, oh, I can launch a course. I could do a CPG product. I could do a Patreon. I can monetize through sponsorships. There's so many different levers that you can pull that it
Yeah.
almost becomes overwhelming. And I think most people intuitively understand what levers they're more aligned to and what they should be going after. And it's like, it sounds esoteric, but it's almost important to like listen to whatever's within you with your own spirit and just run at that thing as fast as you can. And I'm curious for you with your own levers, did you know that you would eventually start a CPG brand, or did you just want to have your own business and CPGs just kind of naturally evolved?
Yeah, no, I have always wanted to start a physical product company, and I went into it knowing, like, eyes wide open, these businesses are terrible. Like, there are a million easier ways to make money than to start one of these CPG businesses. Like, I had been exposed to tech and crypto and all the easier ways to make money. But like CPG had one, I'd started my career basically working at Away, so I'd kind of fallen in love with the idea of like, wow, I can walk into an airport and see my product everywhere. There's something special about that, and I was exposed to it very early on. And two, it's just like there is. You said like I don't want to simplify the business earlier, but like there is something beautiful about the simplicity of like I'm going to make something, I'm going to then sell it. Like there is something simple, and as like the business model is not overly complicated. And I don't say that in like a pejorative way. I mean that in like a it's an elegant business if you can do it well and scale it and all of that. So yeah, I always wanted to start
Yeah.
one of these things.
Mm.
When did the light bulb go off for you that you were gonna start kind of open sourcing your business and showing people like beneath the hood of what you were doing?
Yeah, basically from the beginning.
Really?
Going back to Packy, I kind of he built in public and all of that, so I saw it work for him and thought this is an interesting strategy for me to take as I'm getting the brand off the ground. I also thought like people are weirdly secretive about their numbers. Like I don't know what someone's going to do by knowing like what my revenue was in month two. Like, oh, you're gonna go start a creatine gummy brand. That's fine. The people that I'm worried about are not like looking at my tweet and going to start a creatine gummy brand. It's like, no, they're already a industry insider that has the ability to make creatine gummies and can like roll this out amongst distribution. I'm not influencing those people. Likely influencing someone that is not already in the space, and a rising tide lifts all boats. So if they kind of want to join the industry and start their own thing, great, more power to them. But like 99.9% of people aren't going to read the ins and outs of my business and be like, you know what I need to do? Go start a creatine gummy brand. So I don't view it as like really by me sharing. I don't view that as me increasing the level of competition. I view it as potentially, inspiring. It's not the right word because that sounds self-impressed, but like, maybe letting someone else know that like this is possible. I can also do this because this guy's sharing all of his numbers and how he's doing it and all of that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just gonna ask, how do you share in a way that you feel like you're providing value and maybe not like I feel like it's easy to be like, oh, I'm gonna like share my story and maybe like not really knowingly undershare
Yeah.
or overshare. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't really know if there's a world where oversharing is a thing from your perspective, but I'm curious how you think about that.
No, I definitely think about the right level of sharing a lot, not in the sense that like I'm worried that I'm going to overshare information, in the sense that like I'm just sharing numbers and like is anyone actually going to get value from me sharing numbers? Like, is there anything actionable in what I'm sharing here? And so I try to infuse the way this manifests is essentially like on each month I'll share kind of a few metrics on the previous month's performance, some learnings, some tactics that I took. But like I have seen myself over the last couple of months as the business has grown get away from sharing things that I think would actually be helpful for people. And so I just kind of need to relearn at this stage what do I think would be helpful for people, versus like when I was first getting started out, it was very tactical of like, oh wait, this is would be super helpful to know if I wanted to start my own
Totally.
thing.
Yeah, it's like what you know seems so intuitive to you, but if this was you 24 months ago, you would have killed for that information that's just like kind of lodged in the back of your mind. One of the questions I wanted to ask you, you guys were just touching on a little bit, is what do you think it is about human psychology that makes us almost addicted to this concept of building in public? The reason why I asked that is there's this brand that we go back to, Midday Squares, all the time, the chocolate bar
Yeah.
company in Canada, and those three co-founders are unbelievable. We met Jake at a Central Market event in Texas, and we're like just blown away by him. But one of the things that he mentioned to us is that the first hire they made as a company was a videographer,
Yeah.
and they've constructed in a way where they're very publicly going at Mondelez's throat, and they document everything. They document fundraising, getting into retail stores,
Yep.
them crying when something happens, and it's like you almost buy into the founders as the hero of the story, and it's like I find myself almost addicted, wanting to follow along to it and rooting for them.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, what do you think it is about human psychology that makes us addicted to the building in public concept that so many creators have been running towards?
Yeah, I mean, those guys are another level.
They
They're
are.
they're
Yeah.
epic. I
Legends.
wish I had that level of transparency in what I was doing, and honestly, the energy required to put out that
It's a lot.
level of content. What I think about human psychology as to why, honestly, I think most people don't have that. I think like a very small percentage of people actually have the energy and courage and uh, uh, are able to strike the balance between it being both something that like people can find aspirational, but also not find cocky. And like,
Mm.
I actually don't think it's in people's natural tendency to do what those guys are doing. I think it's exceptional what they're doing. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
I wish I had a better answer
No,
other than to
it's
say I don't think the premise of the question is right.
it's
I-
great. No, I think it just makes you relatable too, right? It's
Yeah.
like I think a lot of people, if they're viewing your content or maybe some podcasts in this show, it's like a lot of them are aspiring CPG founders or creators, and they want to understand like what is your mindset like when shit is hitting the fan, when you stock out of supply and you're trying to figure out how a manufacturer can come in and get you those orders, like how
Yeah.
do you deal with those situations? So the struggle is always, how do I publicly tell those stories? But if you can do it in a right organic way, like that's such powerful alpha for a lot of people.
Yeah, those guys are interesting because they've taken the build in public to kind of like the mass market.
Yeah.
Like when I'm doing it, it's almost to build credibility within like the very small online, chronically online, like Twitter community of
Mhm.
other CPG people that like congratulate me when a month is good. When they're doing it to sell like tens of millions of chocolate bars because their videos scale like really well on YouTube and consumers can make the connection between them building in public and then building or buying their chocolate. So I don't know. They're doing it on a whole nother level. They're
Yeah.
impressive.
Yeah, it's crazy. It feels like the line between being incredibly emotionally secure and insecure when you're building in public has to be like very thin.
Totally.
Like you're either like a rock and you can just share it all, or you're just like, fuck it, I'll just share everything and see where it goes.
Yeah, no, I mean, building in public is super fun until like your numbers aren't good. Like you're like shit goes wrong.
Yeah.
But also you can turn that on its head too, and I'm sure those guys have done a really good job of it when there are trials and kind of the troughs
Mm.
and success. If you're able to turn that into a story where people can, as you said, see their own selves in that story, I think that's a good opportunity as well.
Yeah. Dan, one of the things you mentioned is that Create, self-admittedly, it's still in its infancy. You've been around for a year as of today, so congrats on that.
Yep.
What were some of the lowest moments over the last year that ended up actually sharpening you up and ended up being a blessing in disguise? And then what are just some of the proudest moments as you reflect on this last year of year one in business?
Yeah. So I think one of the tougher moments was, we sold gummies for the first time in the summer. And so we learned the hard way that gummies are not the most heat resistant
Mm.
product in the world. And so for a period of time there, our product was arriving on customers' doorsteps in a state that wasn't necessarily at the level of quality that we wanted it to be. They were melted. Melted's actually not what they were.
Yeah.
They were weeping allulose,
Mm.
but giving off the idea that, or they felt and looked like they were melted. And so that was a really tough experience. Like, didn't really seem like anything we could do. We had hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars of inventory that was arriving on people's doorsteps in a quality that we weren't super pleased with, and neither were they. I think what that forced us to do was to get really smart on formulation, perfecting the formula, introducing flavors that perhaps didn't need the ingredients, that led to kind of overly weeping allulose. And that was a really tough period because like essentially just getting hit with tens to hundreds of customer complaints a day for like 6 weeks. You try to not take things personally, but it's just me at the company, so I
Yeah.
take things personally.
Mhm.
That was super hard. Some of the prouder moments, I mean, there's like the smaller interactions with customers where they're like, "Hey, man, I've been taking your product and I've never felt as good," or "I put on 5 pounds of muscle," or I had someone in my broader family tell me that like they had struggled with kind of some mental health issues and they started taking the creatine gummies, and for X, Y, and Z reason, you know, she or he had seen the benefits of taking the gummies, and that was like 2 months into the me starting the company. I was blown away by it. So yeah, I think those like interactions with customers where they're like, "Hey, I'm taking your product and it's doing this amazing thing for me,"
Mm.
has been pretty cool.
Yeah.
What were some of the business ideas that didn't make it to market?
Dude, there's so many business ideas even now um, that I get so excited about, and then I have to like rein myself in from not doing it because, and I talk to people that are in the CPG game. They're like that, are 5 levels above me. They're like, do not launch this new product. Do not lose focus. You have a massive opportunity ahead of you. The worst thing you can do is to dilute the brand that people don't know that Create stands for creatine gummies. Don't launch a creatine powder. Don't launch a greens gummy. Don't do all these things that like seem like a great idea and we're sure you could execute the hell out of, but would ultimately dilute. Like it's just too early for you to do that. Like establish yourself as this brand that stands for something before you stand for a bunch of other things.
Yeah. So you have amazing ideas every day, but you're like, no, I'm staying focused. We're just gonna crank. We're just gonna crank creatine gummies.
That sounded cocky, but no, there's things that come up in the course of business where like, oh wow, like this seems like a great idea. I have now the supply chain to be able to do it. I have the marketing partners to be able to market it. Why don't I just do this in addition to creatine gummies? And it's more of that, where it's nothing overly innovative, just like, oh, here's a natural product line extension. Should I do it?
Yeah. I would imagine it's probably surprising to a lot of people when you're publishing the incredible revenue and numbers that you guys are doing and they find out that it's you by yourself. So I'm curious just the decision-making process behind wanting to keep a very small team to just you, and when do you think the time would be right to potentially expand and build on that team?
Yeah. So it's just me right now, full time. But I built kind of a network of great agency partners and consultants and part-time people. Shout out Lily and my sister-in-law Pooja, who runs operations for me. But yeah, it's just me full time. And part of the reason there is that like I like being very in the weeds on a day-to-day basis and close to the ground. And by not having a team of direct reports underneath me that require me to be kind of a great day-to-day manager, I'm able to refocus that time on the highest leverage, highest priority things within the business on any given day. I don't keep I have 0 standing meetings. I'm not doing one-on-ones about career development. I'm not worrying about kind of politics within the business. I'm worrying about like growing the business, and over time that will need to change. And if the business is to reach its full potential, it will have to change. But where we are in the state of the business today, I think everyone is well off, or is better off if I'm able to kind of fully focus on the more like in the weeds stuff now versus becoming. I want to be a great brand operator and not a great manager at this point in the business.
How how particular are you about the people who kind of come into contact with the brand and represent it? Like we were talking about, Eric Hinman is someone who you got in touch with, who's helped a bunch on just kind of relationships and promoting the brand. But that's so important. Like people who are actually speaking up about the brand really do kind of take on the essence of what you're trying to build. So I'm
Yeah.
curious how you think about that.
I mean, Eric's been a great brand ambassador, and there's a bunch of other people, Brian Mazza, Chernow, all those guys are, I feel lucky to have them associate with Create and have associated with Create since our pretty early days. They're like, we're early believers in it. So super appreciative of them. Yeah, I mean, I think that we try to work with people that have engaged audiences, have audiences that trust them and are able to lend a level of credibility. Just because the nature of us being such a new brand, it's tough to kind of hot or cold start with that credibility. So to be able to lend from them has been super helpful. aside from that, I'm not super picky. Like I have aspirations for, tens to hundreds of millions of people taking this product on a daily basis, which means I can't be super picky about
Right.
who's taking it. And so, yeah, I mean, I try to work with highly credible, trusted people, but over time, that hopefully leads to everyone taking it.
I think I heard you say on Danny Morena's podcast, to your point, that female fitness influencers have actually been easier for you to work with, or they're maybe more willing to create content.
Yeah.
Could you expand on that a little bit? Because that was super interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's changed over time. Like when we first launched, we were 75% female customers, and then it kind of swapped, and now we're kind of back to like 50-50 male female customer base. And I think where it stands out particularly here is that, like, if you look at traditional creatine brands, probably less than 5% of their customers are female. And so uh, just making content that's oriented for that audience because they've been so neglected with on this specific product means they're more interested in it. They're there to learn. They don't have preconceived notions about it.
Mhm.
So it's been an interesting group to work with. And I think generally female fitness creators are a little bit easier to work with than male fitness creators.
Yeah.
I don't exactly know why, and it's not true for everyone. Someone like Eric's super easy to work with.
Yeah.
But yeah, we I think kind of found that to be true in the early days at least.
Yeah. Where do you think most brands go wrong in regards to like developing organic affiliate partnerships or paid partnerships? It seems like that's a big black box for new brands. You don't know who to spend money towards. Should I do the affiliate thing? What have kind of been some of your learnings with that?
I think the main learning for us is that, like, we found one really strong partner in Eric, and we just kind of like let him introduce us to people and let those people introduce us to people. Like we got introduced to you guys
Yeah,
basically
through
through
Eric,
that
yeah.
whisper down the lane. Um, and so it's like find one or two trusted people, let them introduce you to one or two more trusted people, let them introduce you to one or two more trusted people. And I think once you get enough reps on these conversations, you can kind of tell, like, is this person going to be easy to work with? Do I think they'll actually drive revenue versus just kind of being like a credible brand ambassador? So yeah, I would say, like, find someone that's deeply embedded in the community that you're trying to infiltrate already, and let them infiltrate. Sounds like it's a weird word for it, but let them kind of introduce you to other people that are also kind of in the community.
Got it.
Yeah.
What trends are you hot on in the e-com space? I feel like you sit at this very interesting vantage point where you have the newsletter experience with your brother, really like going deep dives on companies, and then also starting your own product. It's like, what do you see happening the next few years? Because it's a dynamic space, changing all the time.
Yeah, I think one big thing is that the major platforms are only going to get bigger. So I think, Meta, Google, TikTok, those platforms are only going to get larger and more powerful. And I think their core businesses are only going to get stronger. Like Meta's ad product, 2 years ago, people were talking about, is Meta dead? Is TikTok overtaking Meta? And I can tell you that that's not the case from an ads perspective. And I think over time, we're seeing, even from an engagement perspective, how resilient Instagram, even Facebook are in terms of usage and the ability to expand into new products and all of that. So I think that's one thing. I think other trends, we're seeing that the gap between kind of advertising and trends and commerce is getting shorter and shorter. So you guys know this experience of like clicking on an Instagram ad. That used to be like a pretty terrible experience where you click on an Instagram ad, a shitty version of a browser would pop up, like a Instagram native version of Safari browser would pop up within the app. It would take 15 seconds to load.
Yep.
Then you get some like kind of under optimized UI on the landing page. And then you'd have to go through the whole process on like throughout the Shopify experience. And it was just like, why is Meta driving us to this landing page that's not optimized for Meta? And why is it taking like 3 minutes to check out here? Why does everything seem like it's running on like 2008 internet speed?
Yeah.
That gap is just closing. You're seeing it with TikTok shops where you can just immediately transact on shops. You're seeing it with Meta shops now. And so I think you'll just see more and more commerce happening on the platforms where traditionally they were just content or advertising platforms. And then I in that same vein, I think like influencers are starting to become like commerce will be done directly from influencer content as well, where someone, to use Eric for example, who works with a bunch of brands, you should be able to look at Eric's content and click, like, basically click on the content and see what the product is and transact directly from that video.
Mm.
And Eric should be able to extract more value from that interaction than traditionally an affiliate or influencer like Eric has. So those are three trends. Like, I think the main platforms are going to get bigger. The gap between advertising and commerce is only going to get smaller, and that influencers are going to take a larger percentage of the value in transactions.
It's interesting too. I feel like, I'm not sure if influencers would like this, but it would be really cool if there was like a storefront for influencers. So if you go on Eric's page, you could just like see all the products that I mean, you kind of can, but just see in more of like a easy fashion, like the products that he's promoting.
Yeah, there's definitely some people starting to do that. I haven't seen it work really well or scale yet, but it would make sense, right? Like, I should be able to go to his page and shop directly from his page the products that he's merchandising for his collection.
Yeah, it's interesting to your point on the big platforms getting bigger. I can't remember the last time I really just like went into a search bar and just like went like www.create.com.
Yeah.
It's always like through an ad or like
Yeah.
through one of these social media channels where I go to the site. So I think it's a trend worth paying attention to.
Yeah, and like, I don't know if this is super relevant, but all of those big ad companies are now also the leaders in AI. And so they're able to recycle their profits from Google ads or Facebook ads into $10 billion expenditures on CapEx needed to become best in class, have best in class AI. And that only feeds back into the ad product. So it's just like a very, I'm not, saying anything novel here, that Google and Meta have like these amazing business models that are virtuous and all that. So, or not virtuous perhaps, but are virtuously cycling into each other.
Right.
But yeah,
It's also interesting to see. I feel like this has been a bigger trend in the last few months. I see all these clips of founders going on big podcasts,
yeah,
and there will be a paid ad of the founder talking about
Yeah.
this specific product, why they started it, why they like it. And I'm viewing it and I'm like, I know this is an ad, but it just feels like this very organic piece of content. And it makes me want to buy the product. And I'm aware of it and I still feel that feeling. So I feel like that's another trend, to your point, that we're just going to continue to see grow more and more, where founders will probably be the faces of the brand even more. They'll organically tell their story, and that'll just turn into a really easy piece of content that they could run dollars behind too.
that's why I'm here today.
That's literally why you're here.
No,
why
I'm
else?
kidding.
Why else would you be on Mafia?
I'm kidding. No, I think that's true, and I think that's certainly been the case the last year or so. Brands have caught on to the podcast style of ad starting to convert really well. I think when every brand starts to do it,
Yeah.
it'll lose a little bit of its
Dilute it.
luster. Like, we filmed fake podcast clips and put it on ads, and like, the more people that do that, the shittier the experience is going to be, and
Yeah.
people will be like, "Wait, this is clickbait." Like,
Yeah.
I don't think it's gonna. But we're not there yet.
Yeah.
The worst
Certainly.
is when you see the ones of like the fake Rogan setup with like the red curtain in the
Yeah.
background. Like, this guy was not on Rogan.
Or like the AI generated Rogan voice on some of
Oh.
these ads.
really?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That
Yeah.
sucked.
The one thing I did notice is you didn't have X on your list of social media platforms. I think it was like 2 questions ago. Are you bullish about X? Are you not bullish about X? What are your thoughts on that platform?
Huh. I mean, I'm addicted to X.
Us too.
It's where I think like I spend 50% of my time online is probably spent on X, and personally, it's opened a ton of doors for me. It's been a great community. I know some people have a terrible experience on X, so not to speak to that. As an ads platform, it's terrible. Like, I
Yeah.
think I, out of the goodness of my heart, spend like $100 a day on X promoting Create versus that's 1% of our Facebook budget. And I think that, and I've talked about this a little bit, but like, that's the problem that Elon has. Elon's problem is not that Disney or Apple don't agree with his ideological takes on things, because they probably don't agree with TikTok's ideological takes on how to treat the Uyghurs in China either. But they still invest tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars into TikTok ads, because it's an ads product that actually works. And so they can look past the ideological differences a little bit easier because it's a dollar in and dollar out.
Mm.
With X, because the product is a brand marketing product, because it's not actually necessary, because they're essentially putting ad dollars onto the platform out of the goodness of their heart, right? Like,
Yeah.
because there's nowhere else to put it and they need to put their marketing budget somewhere. So why not put it onto X? It makes the decision to stand up against Musk's ideological takes a lot easier because they don't actually need to put the money on the platform. So I think if he was able to solve some of the issues around X's ads product, it would actually solve many of the free speech ideological things that he seems to be frustrated with, but they haven't seemed to focus on that to date.
Where do you think the mismatch is with product market fit on the ad side for X? Like, is it just like the consumer doesn't want to be buying stuff off X, or
It must be something with the form factor of how people consume content on X. I think it's also more text heavy, and
Yeah.
so, and I know they're trying to move away from that. Maybe as it gets more image and video oriented, it will present opportunities to have a similar ads product to like Reels or TikTok. But to date, yeah, I just don't think people. Have you guys ever bought anything off of a Twitter ad?
I have not.
Yeah,
Nope.
Yeah. Which
So-
is a shame because similar to you, it's like that's how we actually grew our brand was off of writing Twitter threads about nutritional content in the food system. It's been amazing for us. Best networking tool that's ever existed, in our opinion. It's like probably 70% of our guests have come from Twitter connections, cold leads, commenting at people.
yeah.
Sahil's coming on like right after you. That was from Twitter as well. So we're like, if they could crack that code, it would be amazing because there's so many people that like you that are like, I just get so much valuable information off X. They just can't figure out the monetization piece or the advertising piece.
So you wedged me in between Chernow and Sahil.
Yeah, we're gonna sandwich.
Thank
in
you.
between
Yeah.
those
Thank
two.
you
Yeah.
for
Got
that.
Oh,
No,
and Jimmy DeChico from Super Coffee too.
yeah, beasts. Those guys. I don't know which one, but one of them went to school with me a couple years older than
I
me.
think
and
Jake did.
Jake.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think he's like a year older than you or
Yeah,
something like that.
beasts.
Yeah, they're all beasts.
Yeah.
They're all like sub-3 marathoners too. which
I
is
know
insane.
they're big into running now, right?
Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
like not only are you guys incredible business, you're also freak endurance athletes too.
And they've done this whole thing, I think, where they have like the ranch out and wherever, and
Yeah.
they've kind of meshed their business lives with their personal lives in a really elegant way. Yeah, definitely look up to those guys.
Yeah, they're grinders. They were talking about signing up for a race where they race from, I think it was Santa Monica to Las Vegas
Huh.
in like I think 3 days. It's like 400 miles.
Jeez.
They're just like trying to put a crew.
Is it
together
all
to
three
run
of
it.
them? Are they all wired different?
I think they're
yeah,
all like it.
they're all freaks.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're all freaks.
Need to meet Mr. and Mrs. DeChico.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah. So Blue Raz just came out last month. So you had the orange gummies out for the first 11 months. You released Blue Raz. Was it around Black Friday time? Is that when you pumped it?
Yeah.
What was the thought process behind that? How's the product been doing too? Because the flavor is unbelievable. We just popped some before. Might finish the whole bag today, honestly. They're that good.
Be careful.
Yeah.
No, yeah, the thinking there was that customer intent demands higher during that period naturally, and it just gives us another thing to kind of talk about during that period of high customer intent. It also just lined up with our production schedule in an elegant way. But yeah, it's been selling really well. I was saying to somebody today that we haven't had one, not even like lukewarm, one negative review on Blue Raz, both the flavor and the texture. That can't last forever, but we're keeping the streak going the last couple of weeks here. And I think we'll launch like new flavors over time. I think that'll be our lever to introduce newness into the business, give the opportunity to talk about new things to our customers. And honestly, like people love taking gummies every day, but people don't necessarily love taking the same flavor of gummies every day.
Definitely.
So giving them option and yeah, I think that it gives us a little bit more longevity as a business.
Was there any fear surrounding the idea of just launching a single SKU and not really having any other inbound roads to the brand, just like orange flavor? Here it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think with creatine in general, creatine gummies, like we knew the market was growing, so we knew that like there's going to be some level of demand for the product. I think with the flavor, it was less like some, business case study on like what flavor do we need to launch, and more like, hey, here are 3 flavors we think we can pretty quickly get to market. Orange being one of them, the others being a little bit less, kind of mass market. So let's go with orange.
Yeah.
But yeah.
It seems like a lot of your philosophy with Create is just like not overcomplicating it and being really simple and executing incredibly well. Would you say that's fair or accurate?
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's like one of the, not that there's any secret to like running one of these D2C e-commerce businesses, but I think where a lot of companies lose their way is that they add too much complexity to the business, whether it's launching too many products, whether it's entering into new geos, whether it's being in multiple distribution channels that they're not operationally set up to support, whether it's a CEO thinking, hey, I launched a creatine gummy company and now I need to become a, leader of 100 employees, like very different skill set,
Mm.
right? So I think keeping things as simple as possible for as long as possible allows like the underlying uh, positive attributes of the business to scale. And for us, that positive attribute is that creatine is growing super quickly in popularity, and people like gummies. And so let's ride that for as long as possible before we need to kind of reach for growth in these more complex areas.
What would be your simple advice to someone who's listening, hasn't started anything before, but wants to get in the fight? What's like your one PowerPoint slide of advice you'd give to them?
I don't think there's one piece of my one PowerPoint piece of advice would be to build the PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Like get your ideas down on paper. I think that very exercise, whether it's a PowerPoint or a business plan or even just like a long message to yourself on like why an idea makes sense, why am I the person to go out and execute that idea? Getting that initial thought down on paper or in a PowerPoint or however you want to do it, I think is actually a super important step. And then eventually putting together a deck, even if you don't have the product yet, even if you don't have any of the infrastructure around the business, if you're like, hey, this is something I'm working on. Oh, don't believe me. Here's my deck for it. I think forces someone to have like a little bit more skin in the game. And it just makes things like this whole last year has been like, this is not a real thing that I'm doing. This is kind of a real thing that I'm doing. Oh shit, this is a real thing that I'm doing. Oh, now this is a very serious thing with like, you know, tens of thousands of customers and investors. And like it's just a process of this is a idea to this is a very real thing that I'm dedicating like 5 to 10 years of my life on. And so taking that first step to like this is a fake thing to this is kind of a real thing, I think is a very important step for people.
100%.
So build the slide deck and then create the skin in the game for yourself that you need to make
Yeah,
it
like how
real.
can you manufacture it into being a fake thing into a kind of real thing?
Yeah,
And maybe that's a slide deck, maybe it's yeah, there's other ways of doing it, but yeah.
that's awesome.
Did you ever struggle in that in between phase? Because I know a lot of people talk about imposter syndrome, like, oh, I'm doing this thing now, and like, or yeah, I think there's a lot of criticism or a lot of pressure that people feel to like make it seem like what they're doing after leaving like a corporate job is like of substance, and you're actually doing something. You always kind of feel like you have to justify yourself. So I'm curious if you felt that.
100%. I was like very like telling my friends, or like I'd be at like a a party with adults and like, hey Dan, what are you working on? Oh, I'm starting a creatine gummy business. And this was like 18 months ago or whatever, when creatine had less of kind of a household reputation and all these things. And I'd get these funny looks of like, you're starting a creatine gummy business. Even today, I'm like not very good about, I know we're like an hour into this podcast. I'm not very good about talking or introducing like what I do. I was at the dog park last night and some like investment banking guy is like, so what do you do? And I'm like, oh, well, I have a creatine gummy business. And like, I'm still not even good to it. I'm still fighting good at it. I'm still fighting the kind of imposter syndrome. But as I said, I think this whole thing is just a process of it getting more legitimate, realer on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
Definitely. Dan, what's the best way for people to connect with you to find out a little bit more about what you guys have going on and Create?
Yeah. So on X, I'm DA McCormick 13, and you can buy the gummies at trycreate.co.
Nice. Your
Unreal.
LinkedIn is great too, right? LinkedIn, Twitter, it's basically the
Dude,
same content.
that's somewhere where I've not gotten over the imposter syndrome. I still feel very cringy each time I post on it,
Yeah.
despite knowing it's like this under-tapped audience builder. And it's a great place to post. I still cringe each time I post on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
But
you just have to focus on the fact that like it's such a good product that's literally making people healthier, and by you not posting, people are missing out on the benefits that they would be getting by you posting that. That's literally what I tell myself when I feel that same feeling.
I love it.
We're right there with you, bro.
I love it.
LinkedIn's bizarre because you always get like the same response. It's like, congrats. Like,
Yeah.
good job.
It's from like the father of some kid you went to grade school with and
Yeah.
haven't talked to in like 15 years. It's like, congrats. Would love to connect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But maybe we can get him to buy some gummies though.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Well, dude, we appreciate this so much, man. We're huge fans of your brand, your product, you as a person, and we just appreciate you fighting the good fight and coming on the podcast to jam with us a little bit.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, brother.